Hi, good evening. I'd like to call to order the Finance and Governance Committee for November 22, 2022. Madam Clerk, roll call and posting the agenda.
Chair Zaragoza,
Here.
Member Tehran,
Here.
we have a quorum. And the agenda for the meeting was posted on the City Hall Bulletin Board on November 15, 2022.
And I'm sure the Council Basu was on the way over, so please join me to salute to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, our next item is public comments not on the agenda. And my understanding that we have one individual, Lisa Hewitt. Lisa.
Mayor Zaragoza, Elisa is not available.
Is not available.
She's not available.
Okay, then potentially we might be able to get her later on. So any other speakers, either in the council chambers or virtually?
Chair Zaragoza, there's no speakers virtually or in person for this item.
Okay, our next item, item C1, this is a City Clerk Department approval of the minutes. Recommendation that says Finance and Governance Committee approve the minutes of October 25th, 2020, regular meeting as presented. Hey, and we have Councilman Basua. Let the record show that Councilman Basua is here, and it's about what? 5:05. So, Councilman Basua, we're now looking at the minutes on C1, and this is the recommendation that the Finance Governance Committee approve the minutes of October 25th, 2022.
Okay, I will move the recommended action. If Councilmember Tehran hadn't done it already.
I will second that.
Second it. Okay, this is a motion by Councilman Basua, second by Councilman Tehran. Please vote. Is it working? Not working? Mine, let me see. Oh, sorry for the donkey. Okay, here we go. There it is.
Motion passes 3-0.
Thank you. Our next item is, this is item D1, reports. This is Fire Department, the purchase of 8 Ford utility trucks. A recommendation that the Finance and Governance Committee recommend that the City Council authorize and approve of replacing aged out utility vehicles with modern Ford F-Series pickup trucks to continue meeting the department's mission for the city of Oxnard. And of course, this was required under Measure M as a pre-recorded item, and we have Chief Hamilton or a sub. Oh, there you're not a sub. I didn't recognize you there with a mustache. I thought you were a sub.
Yeah, it's taking some getting used to.
So any questions of the chief, council members?
Councilmember Tehran.
Okay, Councilman Tehran.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation and the information from the staff report, Chief Hamilton. I'm wondering if just briefly you wouldn't mind explaining just for the public just what we have in front of us regarding the purchase, the intention of replacing the vehicles, and what those vehicles typically are used for within their service.
Absolutely. And just as a little bit of background, this has actually come before this committee before for the upfitting of the vehicles. Unfortunately, our original vendor we couldn't get the purchase order through the process without their prices continuing to increase, and so the POs kept expiring before we could actually bring something through council. So we've actually found now a different vendor for the outfitting of these vehicles. And so, but to answer your question, these vehicles be for the battalion chiefs for the fire department, and the outfitting involves not only putting obviously lights and sirens and communications equipment in those vehicles, but also essentially making them a platform to be an incident command post for any incident. So it creates a lot more capability in the back of that utility. And so it has a large slide out tray where they can maintain the resources on scene of an incident, ensure that they can communicate with both the folks on scene back at the dispatch center, any other agencies that may be involved. And so it adds a lot of capability to the vehicle through this upfitting process.
So go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And just as a quick follow-up, typically what are these vehicles used for by each of the stations?
So we actually have another item coming, the next agenda item, which we'll talk about station utilities. These vehicles, though, in particular, will be for the battalion chiefs to use. And the other thing they'll get used for quite extensively is on mutual aid assignments. And when we have to send battalion chiefs out of town to assist other jurisdictions, they'll actually take this vehicle with them, and it won't degrade any of our capabilities here in the city. And so, and then we obviously get reimbursed for the battalion chief and the vehicle's time outside of the city as well.
Okay. And I appreciate that. And looking at the vehicles in our fleet that they'll be replacing, many of them 19 years old, 21 years old for one of them, a lot of age and miles on those. And so it seems that service life is certainly a consideration for those. So, all right, I appreciate the information.
Thank you. And Chief, my understanding too, that some of those vehicles have been ordered. I think the 4 of the F-250 fire stations at 2, 4, and 5 that you have in the list have been ordered. And the current standing in is, I understand that some of the supply limits still exist in the auto industry. So consequently, are we going to be having trouble?
Yeah, so
Okay.
we, the supply chain issues just continue to befuddle us in terms of when we're going to be getting vehicles, how much they're going to cost. We simply cannot get details out of the vehicle manufacturers. And so we were given a very small window to be able to place these orders for the vehicles. And so we've placed the order without actually knowing how much they're going to cost or when they're going to be arriving, which I know does not make a lot of sense. We're hopeful that by the time this item comes before council, that we'll actually have more information to be able to provide, including the cost and estimated delivery. Just as a brief example, we actually ordered about 1.5 years ago. We ordered some F-150s for our administrative prevention staff. That order got cancelled. About 1 year ago, about 6 months ago, that order got cancelled. So we reordered those vehicles. And the update we just received from Ford on those vehicles is that they cannot give us a price. They're not sure when it's going to go into production, but when it does, we will receive the vehicles in 30 to 40 weeks from the time it goes into production. So it just sort of gives you a brief insight into just how bad the supply chain issues are at the moment.
And we're looking at about 80,000 per average. This is only an estimate at this time, my understanding. Also that we're looking for delivery sometime in October of next year.
That's correct. And I need to correct myself. I misspoke earlier in Councilmember Turan's question. So yeah, those vehicles, they do have specific jobs in each one of the stations. And so we've basically ordered vehicles based on the mission that they would be serving. So my apologies for misstating that. We have 2 items with 8 vehicles on them. So I apologize. But yeah, so the F-450 that we'll be ordering has a very a heavier duty purpose for urban search and rescue and being able to tow heavier trailers. Whereas the F-350s that we're looking at would be for a potential backup paramedic squad an ocean rescue vehicle. And so we've tried to order vehicles based on the mission. So only getting a vehicle as large as the mission requires.
So then, once we get them, then we'll look for outfitting them. And
I'm sorry, may I say that again?
once we get the vehicles, then we're going to be looking forward to getting additional funding for outfitting the.
That's correct. Yeah, and some of the vehicles will need very minimal upfitting versus some like the open search and the vehicle that we use for open search and rescue, for example, will need a little bit more upfitting. So that's where we've tried to use sort of a round estimate. Some vehicles will come in at a lower cost, some will come in at a slightly higher cost.
Thank you, Councilman Basu.
No, thank you for clarifying that. I thought I was going a little bit crazy.
Me too. My apologies.
I was like, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Councilman.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up question. Looking at these vehicles and hearing kind of their duties that they would be pulling out for the department, I'm wondering if you would mind just kind of sharing for the ones that are being retired or those that are going to be, I guess, they're placed in reserve status. Does that sound right? So there wouldn't be an opportunity to take any parts that would work on the new vehicles or from the old ones. Does that make sense? Kind of scavenging, utility boxes or tools or anything that would save us money.
Certainly, any of the tools, any of the loose equipment on those vehicles, we'd certainly do an evaluation of whether we could reuse that equipment without a doubt. The vehicles themselves, though, and the either the utility boxes or if they've got a separate box on the back, are likely not going to be useful to us just because the age of these vehicles is so old. Certainly the vehicle that we're replacing at Station 6, because it's so close to the ocean and it does do a fair amount of beach driving, we've got some pretty significant rust issues. So, but we do an evaluation and obviously we hold on to anything that we think we can continue to use.
Okay, no, I had a feeling that was the answer, but I thought we should at least share that in case someone in the public was thinking the same thing. So thank you for that. Appreciate it. That's my last question.
Thank you, Chief. And of course, sometimes you use special paint, to prevent rust to some degree, but after a while, you can only do it so long.
Yeah, it does lengthen the age of the vehicles, but as you mentioned, it'll only lengthen it for so long before the rust does start to eat into the metal.
Thank you, Chief. Councilmember Lewis. Any speakers on this item?
Chair Zaragoza, there's no speakers virtually or in person for this item.
Thank you. So we need motion. Motion by Councilman Basua.
And I will second, and I just want to take a second to
By Councilman
thank the chief quickly on that. I know it's difficult, as was demonstrated by supply chain issues and manufacturers not being forthcoming with pricing. So I appreciate the work that's been done on this and bringing it forward to us so we can continue to provide the things that our fire department needs to do the job. So thank you.
And also one of the things we're looking, Chief, is safety, getting the proper equipment, which is extremely important for our men.
Yeah.
Thank
Absolutely.
you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, please vote.
Motion passes 3-0.
Thank you. Our next item is D2. This is again the fire department and subject a purchase order with the National Auto Fleet for upfitting the eight command vehicles in the amount of $1,053,108. And the recommendation of the Finance Governance Committee recommends the City Council one approve the execution of purchasing order in the amount of $1,053,108.82 for the upfitting of 8 Battalion Chief Command Vehicles by 911 vehicles through the National Auto Fleet Group 2, and authorize a budget appropriation recognizing revenues and appropriations of $490,656.58 for lease purchase fund of 313 and the corresponding capital outlay 301 project C2203. Oops, need a little bit of water. Okay. And then again, this is under Measure M. Any questions of the chief?
No, he answered the questions already.
At least I may have drinks of water.
He's on
it. Councilman Turan.
All right. Thank you, Chief. I know we had a little kind of misstep there. For this one, if you wouldn't mind just clarifying for folks, kind of the timeline in this, or the progression of events, how we had one vendor, things expired just because of supply chain issues and running into timelines, and where we are now with the new vendor.
Perfect. Councilmember Turan, thank you for the chance to clarify my earlier misstatement. So yeah, so these vehicles, we originally received a budget allocation in last year's budget to purchase these vehicles. Again, it took a long time to actually get the vehicles, and then when they were getting delivered was also an unknown question. But ultimately, the original vendor that we had selected out of New York State, they kept running up against inflation issues to the point where their POs would expire, or the quote they were giving us would expire before we could get the PO signed. And so ultimately, the last time that occurred, we pleaded with them to see if there was some arrangement that we could make to maintain the price that they had, and ultimately there wasn't anything to do with their price increase. They needed to stick to that price increase, so we made the decision to cancel that PO and look to move to a different vendor. In doing so, we even with inflation, we will ultimately still save money on the purchase. The vendor that we've chosen, the cost of the vehicle is just a little bit more than what was originally we were going to pay the previous vendor. However, the previous vendor didn't include a little over $25,000 in additional communications equipment in their price, whereas the PO that you have in front of you this evening is for a turnkey vehicle, and so everything is included within the vehicle and within the price that's listed here.
So can I add a bit, is that why the additional $500,000?
Yeah, so we actually were allocated this funding, like I said, in the last budget year. At the time that we were allocated the funding, we had estimated that we thought the upfitting was going to be about $60,000. Ultimately, in hindsight, that was a low estimate even before we had inflation issues, and so we really should have come to you with an estimate of around $80,000 of upfitting per vehicle. And then, obviously, since inflation has really spiked the price, so you can see there we're now looking at around $130,000 per vehicle in upfitting costs. And in the staff report, it lists that we will be the two vehicles that it's actually replacing will still be used within our inventory, just not in that frontline battalion chief emergency response role. And then we have had a vehicle that was taken out of service due to a vehicle collision, where we have added 3 battalion chiefs in this most recent fiscal year. So that was the need for 8 of them.
So do you think, Chief, that we'll have sufficient funding by the time you get here and getting ready to be outfitted? We'll be okay?
Yes, and Betsy George is here to answer any questions on the financing side of this arrangement.
Okay. Councilman Turan.
Thank you for that info, Chief. And even looking at the increase in cost per vehicle, that's across the board for any of the vendors we were looking at. But it sounds like, make sure I get it right, Stonewell versus Sourcewell, that we have savings, even though there were increases in the price regardless. So that being said, what do we anticipate, or what's our goal for service life for each of these vehicles?
My best guess would be that we could safely get 15 years of frontline service out of these vehicles.
15, you said?
Yes, 15.
Okay,
yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Councilman Basu.
I will move the recommended action.
Okay,
Chair Zaragoza.
any
There's
speakers?
no speakers virtually or in person for this item.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I would get a motion by Councilman Basua.
I'll second.
By Councilman Turan. Please vote.
Motion passes 3-0.
Thank you. Our next item again is Fire Department. You better not sit down. Fire Department subject purchase order of Coast Emergency Fire Equipment for a ladder truck. In this recommendation that the Finance and Governance Committee recommend that the City Council authorize an approval of a purchase order for a tractor drawn aerial ladder truck from South Coast Emergency Fire Equipment. And again, this is a pre-recorded item through Measure M. Council members, any questions on this item? Can I, real quick, and I'll let you, Chief, you know, the ladder truck that you bought many, many years ago, we used to call it the snorkel. Remember that? The
Yes.
Is that kind of equivalent to that, or bigger, longer, better, or?
So it's actually a lot better in a number of ways. And so that old snorkel, Seagraves, one, it was a rigid truck, meaning it wasn't tractor drawn aerial.
Right.
And so by having a tractor drawn aerial and the rear wheels on the trailer, you have somebody steering the back. That allows it to be really nimble. So it actually has a much smaller turning circle than the fire engines do, because it can get into much tighter spaces. The other good thing about having that person in the tiller box, we call it, steering the back, is it helps the driver know where to park the vehicle when they're going to put the ladder up. So because that person's sitting higher, so it can view where we need to put the ladder. The other thing that the snorkel that you refer to, Mayor, is so the snorkel was actually to be able to spray water off the end of that bucket. We still maintain that capability. What we do now is rather than having the plumbing always on the ladder and potentially subject to damage, we actually have a hose that we run up the ladder and then a nozzle that we put on the end of the ladder. So
attach it to that.
So we still maintain that capability, but we have a lot more capability in terms of using it as a high point for ladder operations. We use it for a range of different.
And I remember, I think it's a time that, because we have the high-rise building that's what, 20 floors, and I think the capability was something like 7 or 6 floors. Is this new ladder truck any similar?
No, we still, our ladder trucks are all 100-foot ladders. And because it really, you can't, it's difficult to climb a ladder straight up at particularly that high. It's a little spooky once you get to the top. And so realistically, we can only get about seven floors up with a 100-foot aerial.
Yeah, thank you. Council member.
Thank you, Mayor. Similar to the other item we had where we were looking at replacing vehicles, can you just share a little bit about the plan for the current ladder truck we have, and then when this one comes in, you know, will the old one go to reserve status? Will it be retired? And then I'll follow up with a question after that.
Sure, no problem. So what the plan is right now is we have 2 vehicles, our 2 frontline vehicles are both 2014 ladder trucks. So they're both about 8 years old. But the reserve ladder truck that we have is now over 22 years old. And so originally when we went to purchase a ladder truck for Fire Station 8, we actually received funding on a grant to replace that ladder truck. And so at the time, the city made the choice to continue with the purchase of a second one. So that's why we have 2 in the year of 2014. We thought for future planning, it would make sense to be able to stagger the purchase of these vehicles for the future. The other thing is that reserve ladder truck really needs to come out of service completely. So that's the 22-year-old vehicle. It's got a lot of miles, and it's increasingly hard to find parts. That ladder truck was built by a company called America La France, which is no longer around. And so it's difficult to get parts for it, in addition to the fact that it is so old. And so to answer your question, one of those 2014 ladder trucks will go into reserve status, and we'll still keep that in service for I'm trying to think, at least another 6 or 8 years from now. And then the reserve ladder truck that we currently have, we'll be looking to likely donate that to one of the community college, Oxnard Community College.
Is that the Pierce truck?
The Pierce will be the one that goes into reserve status. The America La France is the one that we'll be looking to potentially donate to a community college. To the museum. Or a museum. It's getting to that point.
All right, thank you for that. And my follow-up question is, would you mind sharing typically how Oxnard Fire will use the tractor-drawn aerial ladder? What kind of call would necessitate the typically necessitates use of that ladder truck?
Thank you. That's a great question. So those ladder trucks are used in a number of ways, and so they respond to all. We call it a giant toolbox. It doesn't actually carry any water, and it just has the hose to run up the ladder, as I mentioned earlier. But otherwise, it's just a giant toolbox, and so it gets used on every traffic collision, it gets responded in case it's needed for extrication equipment, or just recently it was used for airbags to actually lift a vehicle off an injured patient. It's in fires, we use it to sometimes to gain access to the roof using that aerial that you see as it's driving around. But in the belly of that trailer, there is a full complement of ladders, a number of 35-foot ladders, 28-foot ladders, 20-foot ladders, 16-foot ladders. And so we use that to access the roof of buildings. And so the truck company's duty on a fire is to, wherever possible, to get up on the roof and create ventilation holes. And that's to try and lift the smoke out of the structure. So it's easier for somebody to survive if they're trapped in there, and certainly easier for us to search for anyone that may be trapped in there. Then it's also it's often used a lot in technical rescue calls. If we have an injured worker on a building site, for example, we'll put the aerial ladder up and then use that as a high point for a rope system. So, or another type of rope system we call a flying Stokes, where we actually have a Stokes basket underneath the ladder, and so we can get people up from high places. Another time we've used that flying Stokes evolution is actually down the coast on PCH when vehicles have gone over the side, and we've actually used that aerial ladder over the side of PCH to actually bring patients up off the rocks. So it really is, it has a myriad of uses, and so we for the risk profile that the city has, it meets a lot of those different risks.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that info, and I think that it might be helpful for folks to know that it's incredibly versatile in what it does. As you mentioned, it's kind of a big toolbox, but has a lot of stuff. Like, I didn't know that you could use it to use the airbags to lift something like a vehicle off of somebody who's injured. And I think folks may see it respond to traffic collisions or to other calls and maybe think, why did this huge truck show up for this? And now we know that it has a number of uses that will help in those types of calls. And you'll have an engine show up, but then you'll have the ladder truck show up too. And you can see that its usefulness is beyond just the ladder getting up to a building during a fire. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Chief, the $2 million has been allocated for that purchase. It says allocated for the acquisition and upfitting, but then down in the bottom, the cost of the truck is 1.9. But the third bullet point says that additionally you're going to be requesting additional funding for upfitting in 25-26. Is that additional upfitting?
Yeah, so there will be some additional costs in the upfitting. As I mentioned in the previous item, we'll go through all the equipment on the current vehicles and see what we can still use.
Okay.
And so we'll try and keep those upfitting costs as low as possible. But those ladder trucks each have about 750 different pieces of equipment housed on them, and so it's a lot of equipment. So we'll go through each of those pieces individually and determine which ones we can keep and which ones will need to be replaced.
I'm not sure if you remember when we first bought the snorkel many years ago. What was the cost of the snorkel then compared to now? Any idea? Probably double.
That is a stretch for even me, Mayor. But I will tell you though that the 2014 ladder trucks that we bought came in at the vehicles themselves were $1.2 million.
1.2.
So, and that was just 8 short years ago. So they've gone up in over 50% in price in 8 years.
That's tremendous, yeah. But
yeah, and that snorkel was probably probably not more than 750,000 would be my guess.
But it was a workhorse. I remember that.
It was.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Those ladder trucks get a lot of use. We definitely use and abuse them.
Yeah. Thank you. Council members.
I'll move the recommended action.
Chair Zaragoza, there's
Any
no
speakers?
no speakers virtually or in person for this item.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So we get up first by Council Member Teran, second by Basua. Roll call.
Motion passes 3-0.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you so much. Okay, our next item is report number 4. This is Finance Department authorizing the equipment at least scheduled number 27 to finance the purchase of a fire ladder truck to finance and purchase an upfitting of the fire battalion chief vehicle chassis. Recommendations to the the Finance and Governance Committee recommend that City Council adopt resolution number 1, authorizing the purchase of certain equipment and execution and delivery of equipment, schedule number 27 to agreement A 7667, master equipment lease purchase agreement with the Bank of America Public Capital Corporation in the amount not to exceed $3,450,000 for a ladder truck and the purchase of subsequent outfitting of the chassis of Battalion Chief Command vehicles. And 2, authorizing the execution and delivery of other documents required in connection therein. And 3, authorizing the taking of all other action necessary for the consummation of the transaction contemplated by the resolution. And Betsy, can you help us out?
Yes, thank you. Betsy George, Chief Financial Officer. This is the less interesting part of the vehicles that Chief Hamilton just talked about. And I did want to clarify. I'm all sorry, it is. I wanted to clarify the first 8 vehicles, while it said lease in that presentation, those were leasing through our relationship with Enterprise Fleet Services. So while those first 8 utility vehicles are a lease, it's not leased through the Bank of America financing that we do for some of the larger purchases. So this covers the second and third item, the chassis that need to be uplifted, and then the ladder truck. And Christian Sprunger from NHA is here to present the details of the financing.
Okay, Christian, any additional information before we go ahead?
Yeah, good afternoon, Mayor, council members, members of the public. Christian Sprunger here. I'm an assistant vice president with NHA Advisors. We're the city's municipal financial advisor. I have a presentation that I'll go ahead and share. It would be pretty brief, but bear with me a moment while I share my screen. Okay, I've begun sharing. Today I'll be speaking with you about, as Betsy mentioned, the financing for the 2 items that immediately preceded this item. As the mayor read, the recommendation is threefold essentially. 1, authorizing the city to enter into a $3.45 million lease. 2, authorizing the execution of the documents related to that. And then 3, authorizing staff to take other actions as necessary to complete the lease transaction. I won't spend too much time talking about the vehicle need. It's been mentioned previously by the fire chief. In summary, the financing need is $3.4 million for the purchase of the 8 chassis, the upfitting of those 8 chassis, and then the purchase of the ladder truck. City staff have accelerated the purchase of the ladder truck to avoid a 3% cost increase from the vendor that would take effect in March of 2023. So this acceleration strategy should save the city about $57,000. In addition to that savings, the city plans to prepay for the ladder truck, which will reduce the upfront purchase price by an additional about $48,000. So total savings a little over $100,000 from those 2 strategies. The city has an existing master equipment lease purchase agreement with Bank of America, and city staff plan to utilize that agreement to reimburse the city for the purchase of the vehicles. The current agreement has been in place since 2014. It's been used several times, most recently just this fall to purchase 2 fire engines. Every time it's used, there's what's known as an equipment schedule is appended to that document. And every time an equipment schedule is appended, you use the next one in the numerical sequence. So the last one was equipment schedule 26. Now we're at equipment schedule 27 for these vehicles. This equipment schedule number 27 will have a 10-year term. So the final payment will be June of 2032. The amount borrowed will be slightly over $3.4 million. Bank of America has provided a locked fixed interest rate for the 10-year period of the 10-year term of the equipment lease at 3.814%. That rate is not expected to change before the loan funds and closes. The rate's actually locked through the end of February 2023, but we plan to close in mid-January 2023. Based on this rate and the amount borrowed, the calculated annual payment is just about $430,000 per year. I'd like to briefly summarize the 4 documents before you tonight. The authorizing resolution, the master equipment lease purchase agreement, the equipment schedule number 27, and the escrow and account control agreement. First off, the authorizing resolution provides authority to city staff to enter into the lease and identifies the not to exceed amount of 3.45 million. The second document is the master equipment lease purchase agreement. That was approved back in 2014. It was signed. It's been in place since then, and it's the governing document. It's included in this packet because it outlines the process by which these additional equipment schedules are entered into each time. The third document in the packet is the equipment schedule number 27. That identifies the specific terms related to the financing of the ladder truck and the command vehicles. It provides the amortization schedule, the repayment schedule, the prepayment schedule. Right now, it has a lot of blanks in it because a lot of those terms are still being finalized with the bank. When we go to City Council in December, we'll have a document that is fully filled in. The final attachment, the escrow and account control agreement. This is the agreement between the city, Bank of America, the bank, and then the escrow agent, Computer Share Trust Company. That document governs the process by which the city can withdraw funds from the escrow to reimburse itself for the purchase of the equipment. With regard to timing, following tonight's meeting, we'll be finalizing the terms of this equipment lease with Bank of America. We will bring the item to City Council on December 20th, and then we plan to close in mid-January. And with that, I'll wish you all a happy Thanksgiving, and I'll see if you have any questions. I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you. One of the things I'd like to mention, as I mentioned before, is that the savings is really important that we do that. The finance department always does that to help us out, which is, I think, is important. And locking in that 3.8 is really significant for 10 years. I mean, that normally, that doesn't happen, but a 10-year at 3.8 is very, very good, I believe.
Yeah, the bank's willingness to lock, we locked it in mid-October, and they locked it all the way through the end of February. So their willingness to lock for that period really removes the interest rate risk from the city. There's no risk that the rates go up between now and the end of February. And so there is a definite benefit in removing that risk to the city. Rates, after we locked it, rates went up. In the beginning of November, they kind of peaked and they've gone back down slightly. So current rates are about where that lock is at, but
and potential, we don't know. That's
exactly.
That's a caveat that we have to look at, and I think I personally think it's a good rate. And can we? Is there a payoff? Is there a penalty to pay it off if we even were to do that, Betsy?
Yeah, excuse me, with these leases, there isn't a call date that we have to wait to pay off. So if we're able to pay it off early, if we have the funds, we can do that without any penalty.
But regardless, it's a good rate.
Yeah. Definitely.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Sprunger, and thank you, Ms. George. I just wanted to share number one. I think they're all interesting items, Ms. George. So, but the mayor already spoke to the savings that our staff has been able to realize through their work on this and locking in the interest rate. I did just want to just touch on, as we look through this item, that the financing of these, I mean, this is typically just how most people will not pay for a brand new car up in cash. They'll typically finance it and, spread those payments out over the course of 36 months or 60 months or whatever they end up with. As a municipality, we're looking at these large purchases for our fire department, and we're spreading those out over 10 years, but we're also realizing savings as time goes on with them as well. And so if you have anything else you want to add to that, Ms. George?
Yeah, I just wanted to add too, it's also related to the life of the vehicles. So as you would seen from Chief Hamilton's presentation, we tend to keep the vehicles for 15, 20 years. So that 10-year loan spans a good portion of the life of the vehicle.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that.
And if I may add something briefly, we call it an equipment lease because that's the specific terminology required for this kind of municipal financing structure. But unlike a lease where a person would lease a vehicle from a dealer, once the city pays these off, the vehicle is, the trucks are the city's trucks. They own them. So I wanted to make sure
thank you for that.
Oh,
Yes.
so you don't have to buy it like a car.
Thank you for that clarification. And we don't have to, I'm guessing, stick to X number of miles in a year and all that, right? Okay.
No, that's correct.
Thank you. All right. Well, those are my questions, and I do want to thank Mr. Sprunger again for the presentation. I have a few questions because we were able to see the presentation live, and hopefully the public can see the information live tonight, get it, and then make informed decisions on that. So thank you.
And nowadays, the cars are leased or bought for up to 6 years, which is really a tremendous amount of time. But a 10-year for this type of equipment is a good lease, I think. Councilman Basu.
I've got no questions.
Okay, so we need a motion.
Chair Zaragoza. There's no speakers virtually or in person for this item.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, and get a first by Councilman Basua
I
and
will second.
second by Councilman Turan. Please vote.
Motion passes 3-0.
Thank you, Betsy. Okay, our next item is again Finance Department. This is item number 5, update on the corrective action plan, the CAP. For closing past audit findings, the recommendation that the Finance and Governance Committee receive an update on the city's correction action plan, the CAP. For closing past audit findings and recommend staff forward the this presentation to the City Council. And again, this is what was recommended by Measure M in a pre-recorded item, and we have Betsy George again.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and committee members. Betsy George, Chief Financial Officer.
Mhm.
And this is a receive and file only report. There's no action that needs to be taken. And Jennifer Hiraoka, our Senior Manager of Internal Controls, is also available to answer any questions you might have.
It to me looks like a really good report, it's just really excellent, and we had a couple of 2-3 items that they were looking at that we can live with, for lack of a better word.
Yes, we're down. We have 3 open items,
Mhm.
2 of them legacy and 1 of them newer. And we're
Right.
working on getting those closed within the next year.
And again, if we go, Betsy, we go back in time, and Mr. City Manager, all the concerns that we had are really taken care of through this audits over time. And I'd like to commend, your staff and you for an excellent job.
Yeah, we have a great team in the finance department and in general accounting specifically that works real hard on making sure that the records are kept properly and that the reporting is accurate and issued on time. So it's a great team, and Jennifer's been leading them with a lot of internal controls, monitoring and improvements.
Thank you, Councilmember. Mhm.
Thank you, Mayor. And as I mentioned in the previous item, it was great having a live presentation so folks could have the information. This is an equally interesting and important presentation or item. However, I see that as of today, this was posted 6 days ago, and we have 10 views. 3 are up here, and I'd imagine Ms. Hiroka watched it herself to make sure everything was posted correctly. So that being said, I think this is such an important item, and I'm wondering if she'd be willing to just summarize a little bit about what we have in front of us so the public can hear that.
Over the many years, that's a good point.
Sure. Yes. Thank you for the time. Just wanted to echo what you have been talking about and how the city has made wonderful progress with their corrective actions and audit findings. At one point, the city has had 186 audit findings. 159 of those were unique. We have resolved 3. We have resolved all of those except for 3. And we are making good progress towards having the last 3 findings resolved, like Miss Betsy George said, within the year. And the 3 findings that are outstanding that are remaining is the new audit finding that was identified during our fiscal year 2021 audit report. And that one was the CDBG HUD audit findings. The housing department is awaiting a response from HUD to say that the city's corrective actions are complete for that one. So just waiting on HUD. The other 2 audit findings, the prior audit findings, one was related to the indirect cost allocation plan. The finance department is remaining on track to implement this new cost allocation plan with the fiscal year 23-24 budget. And then the final audit finding that's outstanding is the IT general controls audit finding. And that one, the city council continues to receive updates via separate confidential reports.
Mhm.
So those are, that's the progress we've made, and the team continues to receive training. So we'll be completing our annual general accounting update so that we can be ready for any new guidance that the GASB has put out for fiscal year 23-24 reporting cycle, or 22-23 reporting cycle. So that's
Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And I appreciate the summary. I encourage folks to view the staff report to see the agenda summary, and then also to see the presentation itself and the link to the presentation that was pre-recorded. As was mentioned by Ms. Hiroka, and I think we've mentioned this in the past too, when we talk about our corrective action plan, in the 14-15 fiscal year, for folks in the general public, you may have heard others say, oh, well, the city had 111 audit findings. That's unprecedented. And I will absolutely agree with that. That is unprecedented for any organization, let alone a municipality, to have that many issues in an audit. But it's continually brought up. The city had. Yeah, in 2014, 2015, it's now 2022. And as was mentioned, we are at 3 audit findings that are currently being addressed. And so if it's unprecedented that we'd have 111 findings, I hope folks can equally see how unprecedented it is to have that much important progress for any organization and a municipality to now have 3 left and have them be not the most severe of findings in an audit. So I appreciate the work that our staff has done with this over time and continues to do right now with our current financial staff and everyone who's worked on this. So thank you, Ms. George, and thank you to your team for all the great work, and we'll continue that great work. So thank you.
Let me add a little bit to that. That's why I continue to share with the public, and also that I believe that we really have excellent staff here in the city of Oxnard, which includes an excellent city council. And so, but again, I want to thank you for all the work. And like we said, we had 186 audit findings, and now we're down to a couple of 3, which is really, really significant. And it's just to share with the public that we have really good staff working on these items, protecting the residents' monies, which are really important to them. So thank you, Mr. City Manager and the Finance Department and all the staff, even including the city attorney.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
And I would be remiss if I didn't thank Ms. Hiroka for the presentation as well. Thank you for that, and for
Thank you.
putting all this information together, and for your summary. Thank you.
So speakers,
There's no speakers virtually or in person for this item.
okay, then good motion.
No,
This was receive and
this is on
file. Okay, well, that wasn't easy. Okay, our next item is council members' items for future agenda. Item E. No,
No.
none. We are adjourned.
Happy
Happy
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving. Thank you.